Section 4. Responding to the climate crisis. After World War II, the United Nations was created. In the 1950s, the Cold War led to more space exploration and reorganization of scientific communities. Research programs. In 1931, the International Council of Scientific Unions was founded, created by Lloyd Berkner. The International Council of Scientific Unions created the International Geophysical Year, which ran from July 1957 to December 1958. The 1950s was a fundamental decade for human understanding of Earth's climate, around the same time as the Anthropocene and the Great Acceleration. The International Geophysical Year combined a lot of subjects, such as solar energy, atmosphere, meteorology, oceanography, gravity, and geomagnetism. As part of the International Geophysical Year, Charles David Keeling initiated a systematic measurement of atmospheric carbon dioxide by conducting his research in Hawaii as a base. His research created the Keeling curve. As Keeling was looking into CO2 concentrations, Bert Bolin was a leader of this consolidating researchers who were interested in CO2 concentrations. Bolin then became the first chair of the ICSU, or International Council of Scientific Unions, new committee on atmospheric sciences. 3 years later, the International Council of Scientific Unions and the World Meteorological Association jointly founded the Global Atmospheric Research Program, or GARP. GARP was at the center of knowledge about weather and climate during the 1970s and 1980s. In 1978, at an international workshop on climate issues hosted in Austria by the International Council of Scientific Union and World Meteorological Organization and the UN Environment Program, scientists recognized a need for an organization that could do even more than GARP. In 1979, the World Climate Research Program succeeded GARP. 8 years later, Bert Bolin then created the International Geosphere Biosphere Program. The International Geosphere Biosphere Program studied the Earth System Science framework. The International Geosphere Biosphere did not supplant the World Climate Research Program. The two programs complemented each other and coordinated scientific investigations. As you can see from this timeline, the World Climate Research Program made 8 different projects and experiments. Their first ever program was about ocean and atmosphere. And then the next one was about ocean. Third one is energy. Fourth one is atmosphere. Fifth one is atmosphere. Sixth one is ocean. Seventh is coordination. And eighth is seasons. To remember, you can make a chart of ocean, atmosphere, and then ocean, then energy, then atmosphere, atmosphere, ocean, coordination, and seasons. Raising awareness of climate change. Scope. An International Community Science Union committee issued a report following the conference titled The Greenhouse Effect, Climatic Change and Ecosystems, which spread the knowledge of what was climate change. Scope, or Scientific Community on Problems of the Environment, then created the Advisory Group of Greenhouse Gases, or AGGG. After the Advisory Group of Greenhouse Gases was formed, the World Meteorological Organization then hosted a conference called The Changing Atmosphere: Implications for Global Security, which was ran by James E. Hansen, a NASA scientist. James E. Hansen testified that the climate is changing due to human greenhouse effects. The last effect to try to make public awareness is the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, produced by Paul J. Crutzen and Bert Bolin. Bert Bolin really made a lot of these programs and groups. The Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change was formed to coordinate between scientists who recognize the risk of climate change and international policymakers who would be vital to a global intergovernmental response to mitigate the damages. Opposition to climate action. Writers Naomi Oreskes and Eric M. Conway published a best-selling book titled Merchants of Doubt that helps to explain why so many Americans do not believe in climate science. Their explanation is a small group of strategically placed individuals were able to halt actions combating climate change. In addition, the larger cultural setting also impacts the scientific community and public perception of climate change. Nirenberg and the Marshall Institute. William Nirenberg retired as the director of the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. Nirenberg then joined the George C. Marshall Institute that defended certain Cold War policies such as the Strategic Defense Initiative. The Strategic Defense Initiative was then President Ronald Reagan going against critiques from the scientific community. In 1989, President Ronald Reagan's former vice president and successor, George W. Bush, was considering taking action to mitigate climate change. However, Nirenberg and his colleagues in Marshall Institute pulled ties to the president, showing how climate change isn't a solved issue that has a lot of nuance. The paper argued the variability in solar energy, not greenhouse gases, that were causing climate change. The International Panel of Climate Change published a report the next year that says the paper from Marshall Institute was not scientifically sound. Still, though, it's put doubt into the Bush administration and the broader U.S. public that the argument was a draw at best. Marshall Institute papers also reach into Wall Street journals and manipulating news coverage and the government. U.S. opposition to the Kyoto Protocol. The Kyoto Protocol, which will be covered later, is basically a climate change goal for governments and countries to try to reduce emissions. The U.S. did not approve of the Kyoto Protocol and opted out because they wanted other countries with less wealth to also commit because the U.S. was scared that their economy will crash due to it. Business and industry. The oil industry has 6 companies that earned a combined total of $219 billion and paid out $110 billion to dividends and shareholders. This huge amount of money is one reason why climate action hasn't taken further. Another action is from the British petroleum industry, which hired a marketing company to produce the well-known concept of carbon footprint. The carbon footprint accentuates the individual effort to try cutting back emissions. However, it should be a collective, bigger action. The carbon footprint led to less groups going against big oil companies, allowing them to get more profit without any consequences. The United States Chamber of Commerce is not part of the United States government, but is a powerful lobbying group that broadly advocates on behalf of the interests of businesses. This group for businesses shows an independent analysis that out of 39 climate policies, Chamber took a stance against climate action 25 times. Political parties. 80% of Democrats are pro-climate change, while 72% of Republicans prioritize economic growth. 93% of Democrats, or those who lean to Democrats, agree human activity is causing changes to the world's climate, while only 55% of Republicans do. To prove how Republicans desire economic growth, Donald Trump, during 2017, stated that the Paris Agreement, an international agreement that aimed to combat climate change, is a big economic disadvantage. Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, and Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro formed a coalition against cooperative climate action. News media. 1/3 of British broadcasters cast doubt on climate science. Fox News, a Republican-leaning perspective news outlet, still puts doubt into climate change. Fox News host Laura Ingraham gave airtime to known supporters of the oil industry who denied scientific consensus on the dangers of smoke. Mitigating the climate crisis. In 1992, at the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development hosted in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, the UN founded the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change became an organization center of government actions to address climate change. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was a catalyst for the Kyoto Protocol. The Kyoto Protocol is a binding agreement that participating nations aim to reduce their emissions by 5% over the years 2008 and 2012 compared to 1990 levels. Procedures to monitor greenhouse gas emissions include registry systems to track and record emissions, reporting an annual emission inventory, and a compliance system to help parties meet their commitments. The Paris Agreement was set by the Intergovernmental Framework on Climate, sets the goal to limit the increase in global average temperatures to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. However, United Nations report from late 2022 indicate that the current pace of emissions reductions is not even close to putting the world on track to meet a 1.5 degrees Celsius target by the end of the century. Next, the Green New Deal was created by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Ed Markey. The Green New Deal had visions to have robust investments in clean energy and other forms of new infrastructure that burn fewer fossil fuels. The name was created by a previous work called the New Deal, which was credited to reviving the U.S. economy during the Great Depression. Though the Green New Deal wasn't passed, the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed by President Joe Biden funded $369 billion to climate funding. New technology and industry. Geoengineering involves manipulating the Earth's environment in ways that counteract the current trends of climate change. One leading direction is carbon sequestration, or carbon capture. Capturing the carbon and locating safe places to store it are two challenges involved in this effort. New sources of energy. Wind and solar generated a record amount of clean energy in 2022, producing 12% of global energy. Speaking out for climate justice. Climate activists try to promote justice across the globe. Humanity potentially faces a monumental disruption to our societies as a result of climate change. Philosopher Olufemi Olufemi Otaiwo calls against climate colonialism, which are practices of extracting resources or producing clean energy in less powerful countries and utilizing the benefits in wealthier nations, essentially being the same as when oil was discovered in Kuruk, Iraq. If the main concern is for justice and global equality, it makes climate solutions come more easily. Justice 40 initiative set a goal to spend 40% of overall benefits from federal investments to certain underserved communities. On top of trying to commit to climate change actions, they also try to build affordable housing and training the workforce. Incoming are a series of people that have contributed to being a climate activist. Catherine Hayhoe was contributed to IPCC reports and teaching climate change to evangelical Christians. Alessandra Korop Munduruku is a member of the Munduruku indigenous group of Saruri Mupu, going against Jair Bolsonaro, the Brazilian president that was trying to raise deforestation in Brazil. She has saved 400,000 acres of rainforest from 27 mines. Greta Thunberg created the Fridays for Future movement that claimed 14 million participants in 7,500 cities across the globe. At just 15 years old, Greta Thunberg protested against Swedish parliament as a school strike, calling action to the fact that climate change was threatening her generation's future. She pointed the inexcusable and highlighted the irony of children taking action while adults don't. Louisa Neubauer also spoke about the sermon by drawing into neglected teachings of Jesus Christ to uphold treasures of earth. Vanessa Nakata also spreads the international message to Africans to participate in climate solutions. Groups like the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe protest climate change. Standing Rock Sioux Tribe protested against the Dakota Access Pipeline, a portion of the Keystone Pipeline system that transported oil from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico and the U.S. state of Texas. Although this would have created more jobs, people like Lauren Howland questioned about who is allowed to have the final say on who owns what of Earth.